Um, Welcome to the Inner Space Covent Garden talk. Our talk today is Life's Calling. Are you ready? Life's calling, but do we actually hear it? Are we free, present, available to answer life's call? Or do we let the message, do we find ourselves picking up voice messages? Or maybe even ignoring the invitation or call. So if that's the case, how do we connect with the calls? How do we answer? Is there hesitation, fear, a smile, confidence? And do we really need to answer every call that comes our way? Opportunities don't always arrive at convenient times, and growth won't happen by chance. So, do we choose a more comfortable road or take life's call as a nudge and step out of our comfort zone? We've asked our speaker to share her thoughts on how to be ready when life calls. Our speaker, Joanna Kitto, is a retired Psychology and Organisational Behaviour lecturer who's worked as far as Hong Kong and then as close as Isle of Man. She's now based in Leeds, where she develops events and retreats for spirituality and ecology. Joanna's going to be actually sharing for the next 40 minutes or so. And then following that, she's going to do a short guided meditation. After the meditation, she'll answer any questions you have on this topic. So please send in your questions via the question and answer link or via the chat, and I'll put those questions to Joanna on your behalf. Joanna, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Arti. So let's begin exploring this really fascinating topic, and one that's actually quite pertinent to myself. And of course, life can call in many different ways, and sometimes it can provide an unexpected opportunity. Certainly, I remember when I was in my 20s, I was looking at what was next in life for me. And I was unexpectedly offered, in fact, what I was planning to do was I was going to go to France, and I was thinking about taking up a career in terms of becoming a translator or something along those lines. And then I was called up and I was given this opportunity to do a PhD in psychology. And this came completely out of the blue, and I just I wasn't expecting it at all. And it's amazing how opportunities like that arise, and they can just completely change the course of your life. So I decided in the end that that's what I would do. And so instead of going to France, I ended up going to Reading University and spending the next 3 or 4 years doing a PhD in psychology. And of course, my career developed according to that. And I often kind of think to myself, oh, I wonder what would have happened if that opportunity hadn't arisen. So that was quite a pleasant opportunity, although in many ways it provided its own challenges. But I think sometimes life can call you in different ways. And sometimes it can provide you with challenges that really are not expected and can lead you to really examine what kind of resources you have inside in order to deal with those challenges that come up. So, and I mean, challenges can be something that absolutely stretches you out of your comfort zone and can be very uncomfortable. And I remember when I was teaching stress for psychology, there was a study in the 80s, quite a long time ago, and it was about life changes. And it looked at a range of different life changes or life events that people can experience in their life. And it asked the participants to rate how many of these life events had happened to them over the past year. And then they looked at how that had affected them in subsequent years. And in particular, they looked at their medical records. And they found that the people who had the highest scores in terms of having the most life events, that they actually were the most likely people to develop different illnesses. And the kind of conclusion that they came to was that any kind of life change, and this can be a change that we might perceive as something very positive, in fact. For example, some of the life changes were some of them were quite big things, like loss of a spouse and so on. But some of them were actually quite small things, like going on holiday or getting married. Well, that's hardly a small thing. Moving house, things that perhaps you might think, well, that's actually quite a positive thing in somebody's life. But nevertheless, any kind of change, they said, well, it does require adaptation. It requires you to adapt to new circumstances, and that adaptation uses what they called psychic energy. So it kind of stretched you out of your sort of automatic pilot life and got you to have to adapt to new sets of circumstances. And that in itself can be stressful. But I think, when you look around at the world we live in nowadays, when you look at the kind of world that we live in nowadays, you find that there are just so many changes going on, and things are changing really fast. Certainly with AI, and there's just been huge amounts of development. And I think life is calling us generally, both on a kind of global level, but also on a very personal level, to understand that adaptation and change is something that we are just not going to be able to avoid. And so I feel it's really important that this topic is actually really important for the kinds of times that we're living in, because certainly things can happen very unexpectedly. And I'd like to just tell you a personal story before we kind of move on to looking at tools and tips and things to help us to make that kind of adaptation that we might need to make. That was something that happened to me. And in fact, it's the reason why I'm actually no longer living on the Isle of Man. And that was that due to a health problem that I was experiencing. And in fact, I'd had some health problems for some time, but I wasn't aware that it was going to affect me in the way that it did. And so very quickly, kind of overnight, I actually developed this very intense foot pain. And this foot pain meant that my mobility was completely challenged. So I went from someone who was very independent, very active. I used to walk a lot, as you can imagine, living in somewhere like the Isle of Man. And kind of overnight, I was hardly able to walk. And it meant, and I wasn't able to drive because of the pain. So it's like I just completely lost my independence. And because my flat was up a flight of stairs, I also had to move. So I moved to London to kind of stay there, and eventually this is why I moved to Leeds. Now I think in many ways I'm very fortunate in that I had behind me like 30 years plus of a spiritual practice, meditation practice, and I'd learned a lot in terms of being able to understand. In fact, I suppose what it gave me was it gave me a kind of a container in which to put that experience. And that container was the understanding that whatever happens to me in life, there is something that I can learn from this situation. And in fact, that situation has deliberately come my way in order to teach me something. So can I be open to the learning that is being presented to me? So I think I had that container, and I also kind of had a practice of looking at things, always trying to look at things in a positive way. But having said that even within that container, which was like a kind of a safety net, and I suppose the other thing that was important to me was that I kept a kind of vision of where I wanted to go, in the sense that even though I was really debilitated at that time, I kept a kind of healthy vision of myself that I was going to be moving towards. So it was like I had that vision of myself in the future, being healthy, being mobile, being active, and back to a kind of more enriched life was my vision than I'd even had before. So that was there, but what also happened was that a lot of different feelings came up, because when you lose your independence like that, and your whole life is kind of just turned upside down, it does require a lot of resources in order to deal with that. And I found that I was getting a lot of very difficult feelings that were coming up, as you can imagine. Feelings of loss, feelings of despair, feelings of grief. But I think what made that meaningful, even though there were times when I just felt completely despairing and just quite overwhelmed by the whole situation, still, I still found that I was able to understand that all these feelings that were coming up were being triggered by the present situation, but nevertheless maybe belonged to an earlier time in my life, through certain childhood experiences. And that these feelings were actually coming up, and it was an opportunity for me to deal with these feelings, which of course in the course of everyday life, that doesn't actually happen, because busyness takes over, and it's very easy to kind of ignore these different feelings that are sort of beneath, just lurking beneath the surface. And in normal situations, something comes up, you have a difficulty, you feel, you feel what you feel, and then the situation passes. So you move on and you don't really have a chance to kind of explore those feelings. So, so I felt that, these feelings were all like kind of little children in a way that were kind of trapped in time, and they were like different parts of myself that needed to be brought into the light and kind of nurtured in some way. And I suppose the sort of seeing this whole experience as part of my growth was something that I really believed in. And so I was kind of thinking, well, what is it? What is it that I'm really needing to learn in this situation? Now, what I did forget to ask is, am I able to share my screen? Yes,
Yes, you are.
lovely. So let me just share my screen. Well, actually, let me just before I just do that, I just want to give the backdrop to that. So yeah, so I was in London. I was living in London. I was living very kindly. Spent some time at the main centre in London. Anyway, I was visiting some friends, and I stepped out of the car, and I was quite amazed to see this little wood violet. Hope you can see that. It's not a very good picture because I just saw it. And this little tiny little wood violet was sort of peeping out of this expanse of concrete, which was the car park. And I was so touched by it, by its incredible, delicate beauty. And so I just sort of snapped it and carried on. And then there was this little WhatsApp group that I'm on, which was specifically to do with kind of nature, sharing nature things. And I sent this picture and I said, little wood violet in an ocean of concrete, I really admire your courage and your beauty. And I sent that little message. And then I got a message back from a friend saying, just like you. And it's funny because it kind of gave me a sort of recognition of just how vulnerable I'd been feeling, because I really identified with this wood violet, this tiny little wood violet. And knowing that how vulnerable that wood violet was, because it could have been stepped on or anything at any moment, it kind of resonated with how I was feeling, and it made me realize that it's very easy to kind of shun your vulnerability because it feels sometimes a bit like a weakness, and sometimes we don't like our weaknesses and we don't like to kind of look at them too much. But actually, by embracing our vulnerability, this really helps us. I was feeling that this was something that really helped me to kind of understand what it was I had to do for myself. And it was actually a kind of thought that, this little wood violet, this is like a little plant that needs to be nurtured and it needs to be looked after. And of course, I'd spent most of my life really, because in the Isle of Man, I'd been part of this meditation community and doing courses and different things, just like Archie does at Inner Space. And really enjoyed that and really loved supporting people, being with people. But I suppose it gave me this particular experience just gave me this opportunity to think much more about myself and how am I actually nurturing myself. And so based on that, I've put together some kind of tools and tips, just based really on things that I've found useful for me, in order to build this kind of inner resilience that I think we do need in order to deal with life as it's happening nowadays. So, and I think also the whole kind of philosophy that you see around today has moved much more from a kind of curative approach, you know, even like something like health, you know, where you just got a disease and then you got a medicine to cure it. And of course, that is still, you know, quite a popular approach. But I think we're moving much more to this understanding that actually we need to put things in place. We need to look at our diet, we need to look at our exercise, and that kind of getting ourselves ready before time is actually much more important than letting things fall over and then thinking, well, how am I going to rectify this situation? And I think that's true on every single level. So I've just put together this presentation just to share a few things, which just go back to the little violet, and then we'll move on from there. Okay, so let's have a look at tools and tips for listening and being ready. And just need to, because I've now lost the clock. So I just need to sure I can see the clock. Okay, so let's have a look. So being alert to signs and signals. Now, this can be, obviously this can be on many different levels, but just to start thinking about this, I wanted just to tell a little story. And this is a story about Tilly Smith. And Tilly Smith was 10 years old in December 2004. And she and her family were holidaying in Phuket in Thailand, and they were planning to go to the beach. Now, 2 weeks before that, Tilly had she'd been in a geography lesson, and her teacher had taught her about the signs of a tsunami and what those signs were. And Tilly noticed that on the beach there were several signs, like this froth, this particular froth, the water withdrawing. And she realized at that point, she was alert enough because, you know, she could have been in the lesson and she could have not been listening, and she could have been in the lesson and she could have forgotten everything. But because she was alert, she was very present to what the situation was telling her. And of course, when she told her parents, they didn't believe her. And so she had to kind of, you know, try to convince them. And just in the end, and her sister believed her. And they both completely refused to go to the beach. And in the end, the father listened to her, and they told the bodyguard on the beach, and he warned all the people on the beach, and all of these people got off the beach before the wave, the tsunami, which I'm sure all of you will know about, struck that particular beach. So actually, her being alert and also acting on that, because she could very easily have said, "Oh, well, I must have made a mistake," and not kind of taken notice of the signal that was being presented to her. She actually saved about 100 people's lives. So it's really important when signs and signals are there. And of course, in a way, there are probably signs and signals that we may be missing on many occasions. So it's important to learn, I think, this ability to be able to be present and to also to tune into any signs or signals that I might be given, and also to take action on that as well. I think there are many things these days that distract us from being present. There are, there's endless different devices. And I think often also our past experiences can distract us from really meeting the needs of the situation that's in front of us. I remember a study which I found very interesting, which was looking at the way that people experience, or looking at people's moment-to-moment experiences and how they kind of process the information that's in front of them. And there were kind of two different types of processing that were mentioned. And they were looking at the brain imaging while the people were doing this. And one of them noticed, one of the methods was that they were, it's like they were processing the situation and through the default memory networks in their brain, which meant that they were always, they had some kind of narrative that was going on about themselves and about others. And they were kind of telling a story in their heads, in other words. But it meant that in a way they were constantly distorting what they were perceiving through this kind of lens of the past. Now that was one way. And the other way was where people actually were kind of mindful, and they were actually just dealing with or just experiencing what was in front of them in terms of the sights and sounds. So they were actually much more present. And of course, if we're constantly being hijacked by past by past emotions, past feelings, for example, then it's actually quite difficult for us to be present. So I feel that this kind of developing this art of being present is actually something that's quite important. And this is actually the second point, is being present and being self-aware. So mindfulness is certainly a practice which is very common nowadays, and it's really helpful in terms of being very present, to learning to kind of get out of my head, because sometimes we are very caught up. If you think about when we're walking along in the countryside, and certainly I've caught myself doing this, walking along this beautiful countryside, and instead of actually being present to the sights and sounds and the beauty around me, I'm actually just, pondering something in my head and thinking about what I'm going to be doing next and what happened yesterday, and I'm not really able to be present, in which case it's very difficult to pick up the kind of signs and signals that I might need to pay attention to. And I think often we have that habit of just being very preoccupied by what's going on, rather than just practicing being here now with what's in front of us. And certainly many mindful practices will help us to do that. But I think as well as being present, say, to our breathing and to the sights and sounds and so on, which is a good practice to have. It's also important. One thing that I've learned through meditation is actually to be present to all the positive qualities that I've got inside, so that I can actually bring those qualities into the situation. So whatever I'm doing, can I pay attention to what I'm doing? But also, can I bring a particular quality to that? For example, it might be accuracy, or it might be patience. It could be courage. Whatever it is, it's like, am I present to my own unlimited potential, my own potential that I have inside? And can I bring that out and use that in the moment, and use it to enhance my experience? And I think I also feel very fortunate in terms of having a long stretch of meditation practice behind me, because I do feel that that helps me to process my feelings on a day-to-day basis. It helps me to become much more aware of what's going on inside, because I think the demand, when we're very caught up with all the demands that we have on us, sometimes we can actually forget about ourselves, and just and this can lead to becoming quite over sort of exhausted, or feeling overburdened. But when I have that practice of actually taking time for myself and being able to notice what is going on inside of myself, and being present to my potential, then it's like I can bring that much more easily into my everyday life. So, and I think, we do need resources. We do need to access resources to deal with situations. So, being able to take that time to really access those resources is important. Knowing my strengths and weaknesses. When we come into a difficult situation, it's really important to know what my strengths are and what I have to deal with that situation. Sometimes we focus a lot more on our weaknesses and kind of think, well, I really must do something about that. And I think that's also important, because there's so much available to us, and I know where we perceive ourselves to have weaknesses, there is so much that we can do to improve ourselves. And certainly Inner Space does a wonderful job of providing different courses and different opportunities for us to develop ourselves personally and strengthen our inner world. And certainly it helps me as well to use my strengths. And one of the philosophies about strengths is that if I focus more, I need to know my weaknesses, but also if I really focus on and play to my strengths more, then it's like, actually it helps me to let go of weaknesses, because I'm focusing much more on using my strengths. And there's a very good website which I would recommend anyone visiting, and that is viacharacter.org, because they have a wonderful strengths survey which anybody can do, and it takes about, I can't remember, maybe 10 minutes, something like that. And it comes up with a list of 24 of your, or 12 of your character strengths in a long list from highest to lowest. And it's really interesting to be able to identify what your strengths are. So, and then, when what they then encourage us to do is to think of something every day to make sure that you use your strengths every day, because the more you build on your strengths, then the more that they grow. Something else that I've developed over the last few years, particularly, have been self-compassion practices. And that story about the little wood violet made me much more aware of how important that was. And so I often ask myself, what is the state of my inner flower? And to what extent, because any kind of plant, as you know, if you're looking after a plant, you have to take care of it and you have to make sure that it's got everything that it needs, that it doesn't have too much water or too little water. If it needs feeding, you need to give it some kind of plant food. And it's like, we need to have that awareness that relates to our own self as well. And what kind of caring do I need at this time in order to move through the different situations that I might be facing? And how can I support myself better? Because I found that I wasn't so used to supporting myself, as I said earlier. And I had to change that. I had to find ways that I could support myself. And in fact, all the things that I'm sharing are very much connected to that journey. It's really useful to have some comforting words or phrases, things that you've thought about and that really resonates with you personally. For me, I found that I needed to develop a kind of inner safety, even though the circumstance that I was in used to make me feel very insecure at times because of being put in this circumstance of being so dependent on other people for a time. So I developed a few, and I suppose my favorite one is one that I say to myself quite often, and that is, and I can't quite remember where I heard it from, but it's just something that I came across, and I sort of adopted it straight away. And that was, you are safe, you are loved, all is well. You are safe, you are loved, all is well. And I really found that very comforting, and I sort of bring it out of my back pocket when I need it. And finally, what I found was also that because of certain childhood experiences that I'd had, my nervous system, I noticed that my nervous system was always was very prone to being kind of in overdrive, in that I would often find myself in a sort of fight or flight state, even when it was a kind of minor trigger. So I needed to develop. I found, researching it, and I think again this is much better understood these days, is that we need to find ways of actually regulating the nervous system so that we can find these ways of because it's like the traumas or challenges in life that we found difficult. These can get very stored in the body, and it can end up with us having patterns of tension that need to be released. And so these particular practices are quite helpful that I found. So different kinds of breathing. There's a wonderful book by James Nestor called Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art. And that just tells you everything you need to know about breathing, as well as a number of different breathing techniques. I really like resonant breathing, which is breathing in and out, breathing in 5.5 seconds, breathing out 5.5 seconds. And of course, you need some sort of guided YouTube thing for that. But that kind of puts all your systems in harmony in your body, both mental and physical. And so I've really appreciated that. And toning and singing. Toning is a bit like chanting. It's like holding a particular note. And it's very reverberating, and it kind of has a very positive effect. And in fact, in Leeds, we have a little group that meets every week, which is a breathing, toning, laughing as well. Laughing's very good, and singing group. And we do all of this in the space of an hour. We kind of go through all those different things, and it's a lovely thing to do with other people, particularly singing, because not only do you have the kind of resonance going through your body, which is very good for all your cells, but you also have the kind of social aspect of it as well. And finally, somatics, which is about some gentle kind of movements which are designed to reprogram your body in order to release patterns of tension. And I found that very helpful as well. And so as well as those practices, which have really helped my physical system and mental system, the last thing I think that's really important in these times, in these challenging times, to help us to be kind of ready and prepared, is to have a good social support network. I really feel that the community groups that I used to be involved in the Isle of Man, I haven't so much done this since I've been in Leeds, because I've been much more kind of focused on my healing journey. But I do feel that, and obviously I belong to the meditation community here, but I do feel that these networks are very supportive, and something that we need to take time to develop and grow and nourish in our everyday lives, need to be part of our everyday lives. So those are just a few things that I'd like to share, which I feel is important to kind of to be listening to my life and what life is calling me to do, so that I can respond appropriately, and also to take steps even before I might be called, to have things in place where I'm able to be able to kind of self-soothe myself, and also relax, and be able to access all the inner resources that I have to deal with life. So thank you very much for that. And I'd like to just do a very short meditation. So let me sit comfortably and bring my attention to my breathing just for this moment. This is a good way of becoming present, because breathing is something that I do 24/7. And let me take the breath right down into the abdomen, and not just breathe shallowly from the chest, because this is the way that my nervous system begins to respond, to become calm. But also let me be aware that within myself I have this unlimited potential that is waiting to be realized, and that the situations in my life are designed to bring out this potential, to enable me to use the qualities that I have naturally inside, and to activate the resources that can sometimes remain dormant. So let me take this time every day to touch base with myself, to give myself that time to support my journey wherever it leads me. And to enjoy that space where I can be myself and find that inner peace, that inner power, that inner resilience.
Thank you, Joanna, for the practical tips and insights, but also sharing your personal journey and how you've managed it. Thank you very, very much. The very first question that's come in is, when you have had a traumatic event take place in your life, and as a defense mechanism, you haven't dealt with it and just moved on, should we open old wounds to nurture ourselves?
I think, life will call us to do so if it's necessary. But I think, we can be proactive, and find ways to, but we have to be quite careful with that. And it's important to seek professional help if that's something that we choose to do. But I think it's a very individual choice. Certainly, if there are patterns of behavior which are getting in the way of me leading my life at the moment, then perhaps there are things that we need to address. But it's a very personal choice, and I think each one has their own journey, and I think it becomes clear. For me, it was something that I had. It was like I was forced into it. It was like, okay, now it's time to do that. But each one has to find their own way with this, I think.
Thank you. Next question. Could you explain more what you mean by bringing your potential to your meditation sessions?
Well, I feel that all of us have much more potential than we're utilizing at the moment. And I feel that meditation, well, certainly the meditation, the Raj Yoga meditation that I've been practicing, it tells me that I'm not just this, physical form. I'm not just this identity that I've kind of assumed for this lifetime. There's actually a lot more to me than that, and I have this unlimited potential because my original way of being is to be completely peaceful, powerful, positive, and it's only my kind of conditioned, my sort of limited way of seeing myself that sort of shuts that down in many ways. I mean, I think, people, for example, who've had near-death experiences often talk about this, where they kind of step outside of the limitations of their current identity and they see, they experience themselves to be something completely different. And I feel that meditation practice, to some degree, helps us to sort of touch that unlimited potential, and therefore, we're more able to bring it out. If we don't know it's there, then it's like we don't feel it, we don't experience it. But because in meditation I'm experiencing it, it's like I can bring it out and I can access it and make it something real.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing your amazing tools. But here's the question. When you are caught off guard in a moment of self-doubt, which are the first go-to tools, the ones that you find work the fastest?
Well, I think yeah, that's a really interesting question. Um, I suppose I mean, to be honest, I think uh, something like laughing, laughing. I've developed this as a practice now, and and I do find that that does change things very quickly. You know, there's various sort of laughing practices that you can do now on YouTube, and toning also. I also find that that works very well, and breathing. I think breathing is perhaps, yeah, perhaps is the go-to one. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question. I really liked what you said about keeping positive qualities in front of you in your daily life. How are you doing this in a practical way?
How am I doing this in a practical way, my positive qualities? Well, I think that's something that I can, if I'm conscious and aware, again, it's about being aware and looking at the situation that I'm in and thinking, reflecting to myself, what quality is going to enhance this particular task that I'm doing. So this, um, so I think, this is really the way to use it is to know that I've got them, but also to keep reflecting on which one is going to be useful to me. Also, another thing that I do is I just pick a positive quality at the beginning of the day. I don't always remember to do this actually, but I do have a little bowl where I have all these positive quality, the virtue cards, and if I pick one at the beginning of the day and I really use it throughout the day, I kind of make it keep it in the back of my mind. It's really fun, actually. It's really a fun thing to do, to keep the positive quality that I've chosen and then see how I can use it through the day. It's a good practice.
Please advise on how to live through an abscess of emptiness and loneliness.
Through a absence.
Ab abscess?
Oh, abyss. Like an
Abyss.
abyss. Mhm.
Yes.
So, ooh, well, I think we need to, I wouldn't, again, it's something that when we experience something as deep as an abyss of loneliness, then it's something that we maybe need to get some help with, some professional help with. But otherwise, I do feel that reaching out to a friend, perhaps that we can trust, that we know well, that we can trust, it's important to have someone to talk to. And this is why I was talking about support networks. Um, or perhaps if I'm not if I don't feel I can do that, and then there are so many different groups that we can join these days. It's something that I can research, find a group that where I can connect with others, maybe experiencing something similar. I know since COVID, there's all kinds of different online groups that I can connect with, particularly about loneliness and feelings of isolation. And certainly, to keep connected within a space and all the things that they do, because I think the learning that we get from their courses and what they offer, the talks and so on, this helps us to connect with ourselves and also with others more easily.
Thank you. Um, Next question. The person saying they have a problem with their skin right now with itching and eruptions, and it can be quite erratic. What is the opportunity here?
Well, unfortunately, and I know this is going to sound like a sort of get out clause, but but unfortunately, it's very difficult to be able to, to know what is the learning for another person, another soul, or whatever, because it's like I'm on my soul journey, and I kind of have to be open to what the learning is in my situation, and Sorry. And I think that's true for all of us. And sometimes, maybe sometimes a situation is just a kind of an annoying situation, and that's all it is. I don't know, but I've certainly found for myself that generally there is something that I can learn from most of the situations. I mean, to be honest, there are still some situations which kind of, yeah, I find a bit tricky as well. But I think just to keep that in mind, it helps us to kind of explore a situation, maybe find creative solutions to it, and maybe not, because what I have found is that this thing of feeling like a victim is not helpful, and it's taken me a long time to kind of work through layers and layers and layers of this thing of just kind of feeling despairing, or going into a state of feeling despairing, and stay, and kind of getting stuck in that, because I found that it doesn't really help. And, you can kind of allow yourself 5 minutes of that every day, but more than that, and it doesn't, it's really not helpful. So it's also perhaps about finding, creative ways of looking at things. And I think when we kind of keep upbeat about things, which is what it's all about, really, as much as we can. I mean, it doesn't always happen, but as much as we can, it's like I'm bringing a kind of positive vibration to circumstances, and then I do feel that, so, kind of resolutions appear. So it's like, with the skin thing, maybe there's some kind of resolution that's waiting for me, if I can just sort of change my attitude towards it. I don't know.
It's hard to tell, isn't it? But it's interesting. I have a friend who gives themselves permission to get out all their whinging in 5 minutes. And after that, they are the most positive, proactive person. And it's because they've just allowed themselves to express something that's come into their head. It's not necessarily deep and meaningful, a major problem, but they haven't kind of buried it and kept burying it. So interesting approach, definitely. Well, Joanna, that brings us to the end of our evening. It's been fascinating. So thank you very, very much. I know